Hello and welcome to The Truth About Storytelling. I'm Tyreen Martinson, author, poet, podcaster, and creative explorer. I've published several novels, dozens of short stories, and over 100 poems across fantasy, sci-fi, nonfiction, and poetry genres. And I'm here to share what I've learned from my writing journey. On this podcast, I attempt to pull back the curtain on the writing life, the triumphs, the struggles, and everything in between. Whether it's a peek into my current projects, tips for writers, or just some storytelling talk, I hope you'll find encouragement, inspiration, and a few practical takeaways. Each month, I also highlight special book deals and upcoming releases, so stick around for those updates at the end of the episode. Today, I have several mini parts to this episode. First up, I'm going to share personal updates. Then I'm going to share a little bit about the Insecure Writer Support Group Blog Hop this month. I'm going to talk briefly about encouraging readers, and then I'm going to jump into the main part of the episode, which is all about legendary swords and legendary objects in our shared imagination. So let's get started with personal updates. So one of my goals is to become a healthy writer, and I am working on that in a variety of ways. One of those ways is by working on how many steps I do every day, and some of it is how I eat and what I eat and those types of things. But there's this other aspect that I try to tackle, actually two other aspects that I try to tackle as part of my becoming a healthy writer. One of those is about mental and emotional health. I write in my journal, I pray, I think about how I feel about things and kind of explore that again in my journal. Mainly, I do affirmations, I write down accomplishment lists at the end of the day, what I actually accomplished during the day and what I feel good about. And I also spend some time in prayer for my spiritual health. And I think about what I'm doing as someone who believes in God and how I'm behaving and speaking. And sometimes my words and my actions are definitely not in line with my faith, and I need to pray about that and ask God for forgiveness again, because I'm a sinner saved only by God's grace, and I have some things I need to wrestle with, right? One of the things I've been wrestling with for, I would say, the last 3 to 6 months is an invitation and an opportunity that I haven't been sure I should take. And there's different reasons for my my worries over taking that opportunity, but I came to a conclusion yesterday morning that I am going to go on that opportunity. I am going to say yes to that opportunity. I already said yes yesterday morning to this opportunity, and I'm actually probably the latest person to say yes to the opportunity from my church, and it's a trip to Mongolia to pray for, worship with, and support new Christian churches in Mongolia, and not only in one of the major cities, but in the upper region of one of the provinces of Mongolia that's more north of the major cities. And I don't have all the details to share with you yet, but I'm really excited about going on that trip. It will be 76 days from now. So I have a very short period of time to prepare myself spiritually, mentally, physically for that trip, as well as doing all of the regular trip preparations, listening to some language podcasts and language videos to help me at least be able to hear the Mongolian language and hopefully be able to say hello and goodbye and thank you. I would love to be able to say more than those things, but I will be happy if I can master at least those before we leave. So I'm really excited about that trip. And I want to welcome you to kind of join me on the journey, because I'll be sharing more about that trip, about the preparations, and about going through my website, through a Patreon page, and through this podcast. So I am looking forward to sharing that with you, and I hope you'll hope you'll feel like you're welcomed along in the journey. Second up in personal updates, and actually it's kind of first, I have a Kickstarter that's going to be coming soon. I am in the formatting stages of my poetry collection. I want to have a book vault um, proof copy at about the same time in my hands at about the same time I go live with the uh, with the Kickstarter page, so that way I know that I can fulfill the orders for that Kickstarter at the end of the campaign. So that will be coming soon, I hope, sometime later this month. I'm not going to give a date yet. I want to make sure everything is really prepared before I even have a date for when I start the campaign. And so I'm excited to do that. I'm definitely feeling some finishing energy for finishing that project. Now you may wonder, what about Darkblade, the trilogy? What about books 2 and 3? Well, I am still working on that. I have a lot of different pieces that are coming together for books 2 and 3, and I'm excited to share more about that eventually. But and it is why I'm talking about legendary objects in this episode. So I'm definitely there's definitely some fantasy mindset going on in the background, even though I'm mainly working on my poetry collection this week. So next up, I wanted to mention the Insecure Writers Support Group Blog Hop. It's a monthly blog hop in which writers from all over the world all join together, kind of individually. We join together, we sign up on a link list, and we write an individual article on our blog, our website, to go with an optional question or just to be a bit of encouragement to fellow authors around the world. And we put the little Insecure Writers Support Group logo on our blog or website when we do that. And again, we write a little article and then we go around and visit each other. I didn't do a very good job of visiting yesterday. There was some medical family stuff going on that I'm not going to get into, but I had reasons why I was a little absent from that and why my podcast is a day late. But no worries. Things are much, much better today, so please don't worry. And the optional question this month for Insecure Writer Support Group was a really fun one, at least to me. It was about which books impacted us in our childhood and how they impacted us. And I kind of flipped it a little bit and I decided that I think about books that made me a writer. And I think I've talked about this before, but I come from a very book friendly, book loving, storytelling loving family. And even just today, I was out and about with my parents, and someone had commented on the fact that they loved that my parents always have a book with them to read. And I love that about my parents too. I love the fact that they always read in public, they always have a book with them. And if they don't have one in their hands or in their walkers, they have these little three-wheeled walkers with kind of a place to put things in the middle. If they don't have a book there, they have a book in the car, or they have like 5 books in the car. They always have books with them somewhere. And because they love to read so much. But they also love to tell stories. And when I grew up, I got to hear fairy tales and I got to hear the Bible read to me out loud. I got to have stories told to me from the real life of my grandmother and my parents and other people in the family. And I just love that. And that definitely influenced what I write about, and it influenced my creative imagination. So I go into more of that on my website and my blog this week, but just kind of wanted to mention that it's interesting to think about stories from our childhood that impacted our imagination. And I was definitely influenced by fairy tales, by the Bible, by nursery rhymes, by the Sesame Street Book Club, the Disney book club. I was part of each one of those for like a half a year to a year. And I also really loved Snoopy and the Peanuts cartoons. I loved Narnia and The Hobbit. But first, before even those, I was introduced to Peter Pan, the animated movie version, and Star Wars: A New Hope. as a child in the movie theater. So I saw both of those movies in the movie theater. I think I saw the Peter Pan one when I was 5, and I saw Star Wars A New Hope when I was 6.5, and they made a huge impression on me. And that's going to come into another little bit that I'm going to share with you today. I think I forgot to mention it in my introduction. I want to share one little piece of publishing news, and this has to do with AI. So I'm going to preface that I know AI is a hot button issue for a lot of people, but I want you to think about the fact that, so my first ever impression of intelligent artificial life, like a robot, my first ever impression of that as a child was from Star Wars A New Hope. And C3PO and R2D2 are heroic and humorous figures in that story. In fact, I did a blog post a few years ago about how I felt that R2D2 maybe is actually the main protagonist of that movie because he causes things to happen. He's the one who takes the message from Princess Leia to Tatooine. He's the one who runs off into the desert, so Luke has to chase him. So Luke then meets Obi-Wan Kenobi. R2D2 kind of causes some of the plot elements to happen in Star Wars A New Hope. And so, anyway, I'm mostly joking about that. I don't think he's actually the movie's protagonist, but I loved the R2D2 and C3PO characters when I was a kid. So, yes, I did get older and I watched Terminator and The Matrix and other movies in which, computers or AI are bad. And I would say because AI, like any technology, has been created by humans and humans are fallible, that means that yes, AI is going to be fallible in many ways. However, it can also be useful. And the little bit of publishing news about AI that I wanted to share this week is something maybe you've already seen or heard of. And it is that it's come out that Melania Trump used 11 labs to clone her own voice to create cloned AI narrated audiobooks, not only in English, but in other languages as well. And while you may like or dislike Melania Trump as a person, she is a major figure in the world today. And so for her to use 11 Labs cloned AI voice, to clone her own voice and to have this cloned AI narrated book out there in the world, it brings all of that into the mainstream, into the forefront. And it also forces us to really think about what it means to have an AI narrated book. Now, you may like that, you may hate it, but it's something that's just not going to go away. It's not something we're going to shove underneath a rug and forget about. So it's something to really consider and think about as authors. I believe that there's always going to be an importance for a human element in creativity. And I think we have a spark that a machine is not going to have. And that's based on my faith. I believe that humanity has a soul. Humanity is eternal because we're all children of God and we are meant to be eternal beings. And each of us has a soul. And I don't think a machine has a soul. And I've played around with that in some of my writing before. I've written some poetry from the point of view of an intelligent assassin robot who is not happy with his life. I had that poem published, I don't know, at least 5 years ago, probably more like 10 years ago now. And then I had a series of poems I wrote from that robot's point of view. And I have a storyline that I someday might finish with him But so I have toyed around with that idea. What if a robot has a true personality or something like a soul? Um, but I personally, like, when I really think about what I believe humanity, that each of us has a soul and each of us has the breath of God in us in a way that's different than any machine is going to ever have. So even if I play around with something in a fictional sense, I know what I really think. And what I really think is that humanity has the breath of life. Humanity has a soul. Each of us as a human has a soul. And that gives us something a little bit different to work with and from when we're creating things. We are creating things like our creator created things. It's not the same thing as a machine creating things. However, I do think tools are useful. And because I have heard about 11 labs through other authors, and I know that thriller author J.F. Penn, who has the Creative Penn podcast, has used AI tools and has used 11 labs to clone her own voice to use for one of her own books, that it is something that people are doing. And so I started experimenting with 11 labs. And I don't know all of how much I will use it, but I do think it's an interesting tool. And I do think that AI tools can kind of democratize the publishing industry. Currently, right now, it's very, very expensive to hire a voice narrator. And it makes sense because voice narrators need to make money, right? But if you look at my list of books anywhere online, you might note there is only one book that I have out that is narrated. And it is narrated by a human being, at least at this point, as I do this podcast on June 5th, 2025. I only have one human narrated book out. I don't have any other narrated books out because that narration cost me so much money, I could not see doing it again. And I used the least expensive way I could find to get a voice narrator. I didn't hire a super expensive voice actress. I didn't hire through a really expensive voice narration company. No, I went through like a really inexpensive method. And I didn't really pay her that much money, but I never made that money back. Never. I that was it was a complete like financial loss to me because not very many people have actually downloaded or purchased that audiobook. So, if I can create a decent sounding audiobook with AI narration or a voice clone of my own voice, but again, doing the process a little bit faster and with less strain on my vocal cords with a clone voice, why not? Because the reality is I don't have the money to pay a voice actor. I'm not changing how much a voice actor is making because I would never, well, I don't know about never. At this point, I'm not able to afford one. So doing it a different way is not taking away from someone who does that for a living because I'm not currently going to be able to afford to do that. But I can afford to do a voice clone. So I am seriously considering that. I am experimenting with it. And I hope that that doesn't lose me any readership. I really do. But I'm just going to be honest. And I am always going to try to be honest with you about that type of use of AI. I think it's important to be upfront about it. I have only used AI in other ways to do grammar checks and spell checks and that type of thing. And to with one chapter in one of my books, I experimented with writing with it, and then I was having to change it a lot. And then, anyway, I've been experimenting with it a little bit here and there. And I wonder sometimes if people can tell if I have, like in that one chapter in my one book, I've never had anybody comment on it. So It'd be interesting to find out if somebody knows which chapter I'm talking about. But I again, I find it fascinating where we're at in this point with AI tools. And I know, again, it's a hot button issue for many, many people. Some people love it, and some people hate it. I think, again, it's a useful tool, and it's like a calculator, it's like a cell phone, it's like a computer, it's like any social media platform. What we put into it is likely what we're going to get out of it. And I don't mean that just individually, I mean as a whole. What humanity puts into it is most likely what we're going to reap from it. So think about that. If you're thinking about AI, maybe add that little idea into your thoughts about it. How we treat AI is definitely going to have something to do with how it affects us and in our lives. All right, so that was a little bit longer than I meant to go on about that. Uh, but I also want to talk about encouraging readers. And one of the ways that I believe we could encourage readers is to do what my parents do and to have a book with us wherever we go and read in public. Another thing we can do is we can remind people that all types of books are reading. Audiobooks, listening to audiobooks is reading. Reading a paperback is reading. Reading an ebook is reading. Reading a hardback is reading. Reading a graphic novel is reading. Reading a comic strip book that like a collection of comic strips is reading. Reading is more than just one thing. Okay, there are many, many ways we can tackle books and read books. And I hope that if you're listening to this, that you are also a reader. And by that, I mean audiobook or paper or ebook or graphic novel. I mean, in any of those ways or all of those ways, I hope if you're listening to this, you're also a reader in those ways. So let's actually get to the main episode, main part of the episode that I wanted to do on legendary swords and objects in our shared imagination. So I want you to take a moment and imagine Excalibur rising from the lake, or Excalibur being pulled from the stone by a young King Arthur. When you hear that word Excalibur, you can kind of feel the weight of kingship and destiny. On the other hand, if you say One Ring, you might hear Gollum's whisper, "Precious, my precious," and sense the corruption of absolute power. Excalibur and the One Ring aren't just random props in their stories. They're symbols that have transcended their original tales to become part of our shared cultural language. So today I want to talk about what makes certain objects like those legendary, how they function in storytelling, and why some swords and enchanted items become timeless. And we're going to take a look a little bit at ancient mythology and modern cinema and kind of think about what these objects reveal about us as storytellers and as human beings. So not every magical sword becomes Excalibur. Not every ring becomes the One Ring. So what separates the legendary from, we'll say, the merely mystical? First, symbolic weight. Legendary objects carry meaning far beyond their material function. Excalibur isn't just a sharp blade, it's the embodiment of rightful rule, divine mandate, and the burden of leadership. When Arthur pulls it from the stone, we're not just witnessing someone acquiring a weapon, we're seeing the moment when destiny chooses its champion. And honestly, I have to admit that I'm not sure I realized just how much that moment in the story of King Arthur really impacted me as a young reader and a young cartoon or animated movie watcher until after I wrote the Champion trilogy, which is a book about a young woman, or a series about a young woman who receives a magical weapon that is indicative of her destiny to be the champion of her world. So I don't think I really realized it till after I wrote it. And then I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, there's a lot of King Arthur moments in there, even though there's no stone. She gets her sword in a magical cave. So there are sort of some similar things. So, second, with legendary objects, there is a narrative necessity to these objects. They aren't just decorative, they're an important part of their story's deepest conflicts. The One Ring isn't powerful because Tolkien just needed a MacGuffin object. It's powerful because it represents the central theme of his work, how power corrupts and how even the smallest person can resist that corruption. The ring's destruction isn't just the climax of the plot, it's the resolution of the story's moral argument. Third, what makes an object legendary is its transformative power. Legendary objects change their wielders for better or worse. Thor's hammer Mjolnir doesn't just grant strength, it determines worthiness. Only those who embody certain virtues can lift it, making it both weapon and moral test. When Steve Rogers lists Mjolnir in Endgame, audiences cheer, not because he's gained a new weapon, but because the hammer has confirmed what we hoped, that Captain America truly is worthy. Most enduring enchanted objects operate on these three levels simultaneously. They function in the plot, carry symbolic meaning, and reveal or transform character. This triple function is what gives them their staying power. Consider Anduril. I'm probably saying it wrong. I am sorry, Tolkien fans. I read the books so many times before I ever watched the movies, and I've read the books more times than I've watched the movies. So consider Anduril, the reforged blade of Isildur, the Lord of the Rings, from the Lord of the Rings. On the plot level, it's the sword Aragorn needs to claim his throne. Symbolically, it represents the restoration of broken lineages and the healing of ancient wounds. Character-wise, Aragorn's acceptance of the blade marks his transformation from ranger to king. When he draws Anduril before the paths of the dead, declaring, I am Isildur's heir, we are witnessing all three functions unite in a single moment. This is why legendary objects feel so right when they appear in stories. They're not arbitrary additions, they're crystallizations of the story's deepest meanings made manifest in physical form. So, where did this idea of having these magical objects come from? Well, the tradition of legendary weapons reaches back to humanity's earliest stories. In Norse mythology, we have Gram, Sigurd's sword that could cut through an anvil. In Irish legend, there's Fragarach, I don't know if I'm saying that right, the sword that could cut through any armor and compel its target to tell the truth. These weren't just weapons, they were extensions of cosmic order, tools through which heroes could impose justice and order upon chaos. What's fascinating is how these ancient patterns persist. George Lucas openly drew from mythology when creating the lightsaber, but he also understood something crucial. The weapon had to reflect the spiritual journey of its wielder. A lightsaber isn't just a sword made of light, it's a manifestation of its user's connection to the Force. When Luke constructs his lightsaber, he's not just making a tool, He's completing his transformation into a Jedi. Medieval romances gave us swords that could only be drawn by the pure of heart, rings that granted invisibility but demanded terrible prices. These stories began exploring the psychological cost of power, themes that resonate powerfully in our modern narratives. Tolkien understood these ideas. The One Ring draws from ancient traditions of cursed objects, but it's psychologically and spiritually more resonant than many of those objects from near forgotten medieval romance traditions. We see exactly how the ring corrupts, slowly, subtly, by amplifying existing flaws and desires. Boromir's fall isn't sudden, it's the logical endpoint of his nationalism, pride, and desperation to save his people, magnified by the ring's influence. Modern storytelling has given us new classics that follow these ancient patterns. The Elder Wand in Harry Potter carries the theme of death's inevitability, fitting for a series that's fundamentally about accepting mortality. Wonder Woman's lasso of truth embodies her mission of bringing honesty to a world built on deception. Even something as simple as Captain America's shield operates on multiple levels: defense and offense, protection and weapon, symbol of idealism in a cynical world. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has been particularly clever in how it handles legendary objects. The Infinity Stones each represent a fundamental aspect of existence: space, time, reality, power, mind, and soul, making Thanos' quest literally cosmic in scope. When he finally assembles them, he's not just gained ultimate power, he's gained dominion over the basic forces that govern reality itself within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, as a Christian, I think he's only gained dominion over a little part of the forces that govern reality, because I think God is always greater than any made up fictional character. But that's just my aside right there. So some legendary objects transcend their original stories to become cultural touchstones. Why does Excalibur endure while other mythical swords were forgotten? Part of it is the power of the stories they inhabit, but I believe there's a little more to it than that. The most enduring objects embody universal human experiences. Excalibur represents the moment when potential becomes destiny, something every person faces in their own life. The One Ring embodies the corrupting nature of power, a theme that never loses relevance. These objects survive because they speak to fundamental aspects of human nature that transcend their cultural context. Legendary objects function as externalized representations of internal struggles. They make the invisible visible, the abstract concrete. Consider the mirror of Erised from Harry Potter. By the way, Erised is desire spelled backwards. It shows the viewer their deepest desire. But Dumbledore warns that people have wasted away staring into it. The mirror isn't just a magical object, it's a meditation on the danger of living in our desires and dreams rather than reality. When Harry sees his parents, and later when Ron sees himself as head boy and Quidditch captain, we're seeing their deepest longings made visible. The mirror's power isn't really magical, it's psychological. Many legendary objects carry the weight of history as well, connecting their current wielders, to chains of previous bearers. This creates what we call inherited destiny. The idea that taking up a legendary object means accepting not just its power, but its history and responsibilities. Anduril is reforged from the shards of Narsil, the sword that cut the ring from Sauron's hand. When Aragorn wields it, he's not just carrying a weapon, he's accepting the legacy of his ancestors and the responsibility to complete what they began. The sword literally connects past and present, making Aragorn's personal journey part of a larger historical narrative. This pattern appears across cultures and stories. When a young hero takes up an ancestral weapon, they're accepting a role in an ongoing story much larger than themselves. It's a powerful metaphor for how we all inherit both the achievements and the failures of those who came before us. This is something that I have tried to do in the Darkblade trilogy, even though when Dan picks up the Dark Blade, he's not picking up the blade of an ancestor. He is picking up a blade that comes with a weight of history and responsibility. Many people believe that that blade is cursed and that it has a darkness inherent within it, not just because of the color of the blade. But for Dan, it represents his struggle with his desire for vengeance and also his desire for justice. And the choice that he has to make, not just once, but many times. It's kind of that double-edged sword of which way is he going to go each time, and why is he doing what he's doing. He has to think through things. And so for me, it's when I wrote that part of the story and when I'm working on the rest of the trilogy, it's looking again at how to make that internal struggle he has represented by this external blade that he carries, and to do so in a way that hopefully isn't hitting the idea over the head, but making it fun for readers and yet having that meaning still there. Now, I don't know that the Darkblade trilogy is ever going to become legendary, but I did think about these types of things when I was writing the series and as I'm finishing the trilogy. All right, so back to my main topic about legendary swords and legendary objects. Legendary objects teach us about the cost of power. The most psychologically sophisticated examples don't just grant abilities, they demand sacrifice. The Elder Wand in Harry Potter can only truly be mastered by defeating its previous owner, creating an endless cycle of violence. The One Ring grants invisibility and longevity, but at the cost of the bearer's humanity. Even something like Thor's hammer, seemingly benevolent, can only be wielded by those who meet its moral standards, effectively limiting the wielder's choices and freedom. This reflects a deep truth about power in the real world. It always comes with costs, responsibilities, and moral complexity. The best fantasy objects make this abstract truth concrete and visible. Again, in my own work in the world of Aramtir, both in the Champion trilogy and now in the Darkblade trilogy, I've tried to embrace these principles while subverting some expectations. Yes, there are blades of power in the world of Aramtir, but there are many of them actually. And I've been interested in exploring what happens when legendary objects aren't completely unique. In a world where multiple weapons exist, how do you create that sense of legendary significance? And I think the answer lies in some of the same principles that I've been talking about: symbolic weight and transformative power. The blade of the champion, which is pure white, almost luminous, embodies ideals of justice and protection. Then there's the dark blade, which many consider cursed, though it isn't actually cursed at all. The blade's reputation comes from the difficult truths it forces its wielders to confront about themselves and their world. And some of the past wielders haven't confronted those truths all that well. And now it is Dan's turn to be tested by this dark blade. Sometimes the most powerful magic isn't in the object itself in a book, but how the people perceive and react to it. So, what's particularly interesting to me is how modern legendary objects often reflect our anxieties and our worries about technology and power. The One Ring can be read as a metaphor for nuclear weapons, ultimate power that corrupts those who possess it and threatens to destroy the world. Contemporary objects often carry similar warnings about the double-edged nature of progress. Legendary swords and enchanted objects endure because they serve a function beyond mere plot devices. They are crystallizations of human hopes, fears, and moral struggles. They make the abstract concrete, the internal external, and the universal personal. When we see Excalibur rise to the lake, we're not just witnessing magic, we're seeing the moment when destiny chooses its champion, when potential becomes purpose. When Frodo, Sam, and Gollum come together to cause the One Ring, to fall into the fires of Mount Doom, we're not just seeing the destruction of an object, we're seeing the triumph of mercy over power and of friendship over corruption. These objects live on in our imagination because they help us understand ourselves and our world. They're forged not just in the fires of Mount Doom or in a lightsaber workshop, but in the internal forge of human storytelling, where every generation takes the raw materials of myth and legend and shapes them anew to meet the needs of their time. So the next time you encounter a legendary object in a story, ask yourself, what does this represent? What truth about human nature does it embody? What does it reveal about the character who wields it? You might be surprised by how much wisdom can be contained in a simple sword, ring, or staff. The most powerful magic, after all, isn't in the objects themselves. It's in their ability to make us see ourselves more clearly. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode about legendary objects in storytelling. Next week, I'm going to talk about the philosophy of steel and how different fighting styles reflect character and culture. After that, I'm going to kind of do a little bit of a segue from my fantasy series right here about swords to talk about the landscapes of the fantasy worlds and the landscape of fighting techniques in different places. That's kind of coming from that character and culture section into that. And then I'll be transitioning to a series of podcasts about poetry. And then eventually in the fall, I'll probably come back to talking about legendary objects and legendary swords again, because it's a topic that I enjoy and that I'm probably going to come back around to several times as a writer. Now, one thing I didn't mention, and I forgot to mention in the main part of my episode, so if you're still here and you're still listening, and you're not a fantasy writer or a sci-fi writer, think about how legendary objects can be used in thrillers, romantic suspense, mysteries, or even in romance. Maybe they're not legendary objects in the same way that they would be in a fantasy or sci-fi series. Maybe they're a little bit different. But an object can take on a great deal of significance even in other types of storytelling. A grandmother's ring could have a great deal of weight in a romantic story, but it could also be a necklace, or maybe not a piece of jewelry. Maybe it's a pair of coffee mugs or something like that. A legendary object could take part in a thriller, adventure, but you could also have specific objects that would reveal clues about your characters in a mystery or thriller, and also in a romantic suspense. Sometimes in a romantic suspense, the main character notices that something that's near and dear to them has moved in their house or been moved by someone else, not them. And that's a clue to the fact that they are being, that something terrible is happening or someone's stalking them or something like that. That's how I've seen some objects used in romantic suspense. So there's a lot of different ways to use objects in the storytelling without them having to be necessary legendary objects like Excalibur. And I kind of wish I'd integrated that a little bit more into my main podcast episode today. So it's something I'm going to be thinking about potentially in the future. But this episode's gone on quite a while longer than I normally do episodes, and I still want to take a moment and mention a few other things. Mainly, I want to mention a book funnel that I've been a part of through the month of May, and actually through June 15th. So, if you're interested in one of the 67 books available with the Christian science fiction and fantasy book funnel, those are still available, and I will add the link to the show notes. Second up, or next up, I want to mention if you live local to where I live in Washington State, I will be at Barbecue to You in Gig Harbor with my books for the week of June 9th through 15th. And I'll be there around lunchtime for about 3 hours and then around dinner time for about 3 hours. I might take a short break in the middle between those two times. But you can come find me there and chat with me about books. You are always, of course, welcome to buy a book or buy some barbecue because the barbecue restaurant owner is highly encouraging to local artists and indie authors. And I really appreciate his work in the community. And so if you want to come and eat good barbecue and buy a book, please come and buy a barbecue to you next week. And I'll be there. The barbecue will definitely be there. And anyway, I hope to see you there. Thanks for listening. And I'll be back next week with a new episode.